The chilling beginning. What would you do if a normal walk home turned into a nightmare? One that dragged you into a dark world of superstition, greed, and blood sacrifice. Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, is a land of striking contrasts. Bustling cities like Lagos and Ibadan glow with the neon promise of modern life. Cars honking, Afrobeat rhythms shaking the nightclubs, skyscrapers reaching toward the sky. Yet behind the rush of progress lies another reality, an undercurrent of fear whispered in marketplaces and quiet conversations, fear of ritual killings. This is not just a tale of random crime. It is a chilling reminder of how ancient beliefs, mixed with desperation for power and wealth, have birthed one of the most disturbing practices in modern Nigeria: kidnapping for rituals. Families are torn apart, lives are cut short, and communities are left haunted by disappearances that rarely make it into the newspapers. To understand why ritual kidnappings happen, we must first understand the culture that fuels them. For centuries, across parts of West Africa, traditional beliefs taught that human body parts could be used in ceremonies to bring wealth, success in politics, or even invincibility. In the past, these rituals were tied to local superstition. But in modern times, they have merged with crime syndicates, corrupt networks, and individuals willing to trade human lives for riches. Imagine being a young student in Lagos, full of dreams, walking home after school. Or a market woman in Ibadan, heading back with the day's earnings. For many victims, the nightmare begins in such ordinary moments. A stranger offers them a lift. A friend invites them to a party. A taxi stops at the roadside. In seconds, their fate changes forever. The story you are about to hear is not fiction. It is a true crime story, one among many, that reveals the terrifying reality of ritual kidnappings in Nigeria. In this series, we will step into the lives of the victims, the families left searching, the police trying to fight an invisible war, and the ritualists who justify their acts with promises of supernatural wealth. But before we dive into the shocking events themselves, let us first meet the characters at the heart of this true story: the victims, the perpetrators, and the society caught in between ancient belief and modern crime. When we talk about ritual kidnappings in Nigeria, the first image that often comes to mind is that of nameless victims, statistics in a police report, brief mentions on the evening news. But behind every number, there is a life, a dream, and a family left to grieve. Take, for example, the case of Gloria, a 19-year-old student in Ibadan. Bright, full of energy, she loved dancing to Afrobeats and hoped to become a teacher one day. She vanished on her way home from school, last seen entering a taxi that promised her a cheaper fare. Her parents waited through the night, praying she had gone to visit a friend. Days passed, a week passed. Gloria never came home. Or the story of Kunle, a small shop owner in Lagos. Every evening, he pushed his cart through crowded streets, selling roasted corn and plantains. He dreamed of saving enough to open a small store. One evening, he was approached by two men who offered to help him transport his goods. They were not helpers. They were hunters. Kunle was never seen alive again. These stories are not isolated. They represent the thousands of missing persons who disappear each year under suspicious circumstances. For many families, the most painful part is not knowing. Without a body, without a grave, they live in a limbo between hope and despair. But who are the people behind these horrific crimes? The perpetrators come from different walks of life. Some are hardened criminals who operate like organized gangs. Others are desperate men lured by the promise of instant wealth. And behind them are the ritualists, traditional priests or charlatans who claim that human body parts hold magical power. They believe, or at least claim to believe, that using parts of the body in ceremonies can bring fortune to a businessman, protection to a politician, or success to a student. Victims are often mutilated, Heads, hearts, tongues, and even blood are taken for these rituals. It is as cruel as it is chilling. And then there are the silent enablers, corrupt officials who turn a blind eye, communities that whisper about juju money but are too afraid to confront it. Even ordinary people who may visit a shrine for luck sometimes unknowingly fuel a system that thrives on human sacrifice. Yet amid this darkness, one thing stands out: the resilience of families and communities. Mothers lead prayer groups for their missing children. Local activists push for police accountability. Journalists risk their lives to expose the truth. These voices, though often drowned by fear, remind us that not everyone is willing to bow to terror. To truly grasp the horror of ritual kidnappings, we must now turn to the turning point, the moment when a disappearance transforms into a tragedy too brutal to ignore. It always begins quietly. A missing girl, a worried family, a police station that shrugs its shoulders. But in Nigeria's ritual kidnapping cases, silence rarely lasts long, because sooner or later, something is found. For Gloria's family, the discovery came in the most haunting way. 2 weeks after her disappearance, a farmer walking near the outskirts of Ibadan stumbled upon a shallow grave. Inside, wrapped in a torn school uniform, was Gloria's body. Her head was missing. Parts of her body had been carved away. The farmer screamed until villagers came running. The police were called. In that moment, fear spread like wildfire across the community. This was not a robbery gone wrong. It was not random violence. It was ritual. In Lagos, Kunli's story ended differently, but just as tragically. After weeks of searching, police raided a small compound where they had tracked suspicious movements. What they uncovered was like something out of a nightmare: clay pots filled with blood, charms made from human bones, and a darkened room where victims were said to be held before their sacrifice. In one corner lay Kunle's remains, his body desecrated for use in money rituals. The horror of these discoveries pushes communities into shock. The air turns heavy with suspicion. Neighbors, side-eye neighbors, whispering, "Who among us is capable of this?" Families keep children locked indoors. Women avoid walking home after dark. The bustling markets, once full of chatter, now echo with fear. But perhaps the most terrifying detail is not just the brutality, it is the motive. When suspects are caught, they often confess with chilling calmness. The priest said we needed a virgin's head for wealth. The shrine demanded blood for protection in business. To them, the act is not murder. It is a transaction. For law enforcement, each discovery is a race against time. Police reports reveal that for every ritualist den exposed, several others continue to operate in secret. Corruption sometimes makes matters worse. Officers can be bribed. Evidence disappears. Cases drag on in court until the public forgets. And while one shrine is burned down, another is quietly being prepared in a neighboring town. For the victims' families, the turning point is not only the death, it is the crushing reality that their loved one's life was taken for something so senseless, so grotesque. Mothers faint at the sight of their children's mutilated remains. Fathers stand silent, fists clenched, powerless against forces that feel larger than life. And yet, even amid despair, these tragedies spark something else: outrage. Journalists publish reports, human rights groups cry for justice, protests erupt in front of police stations. In the grief of one family, entire communities find their voice. But this turning point also forces us to ask a disturbing question. Why does ritual killing still persist in a modern nation? And how does society react to such horror? When ritual killings come to light, the aftermath is not confined to one grieving family. It ripples through entire communities, shaking trust, safety, and even faith itself. In Ibadan, after Gloria's body was discovered, her school shut down for a week. Students refused to attend classes, terrified that they might be the next target. Parents organized nightly patrols, armed with flashlights and sticks, to guard their neighborhoods. The once busy evening streets grew eerily quiet, as if the entire city was holding its breath. In Lagos, the discovery of Kunli's remains and the ritualist compound sent shockwaves across the state. Protesters flooded the streets, carrying placards with bold letters, "Stop ritual killings, our lives matter." Anger boiled over, directed not only at the criminals, but also at a system seen as complicit. Why had the police not acted sooner? Why did these shrines continue to operate in plain sight? The response from authorities was swift, but selective. Police paraded suspects before cameras, vowing justice. Politicians gave speeches condemning ritual killings, promising harsher penalties. Yet behind the scenes, cases dragged in courtrooms where money often spoke louder than evidence. Families who had lost children were left sitting in crowded halls, watching hearings postponed again and again. For ordinary Nigerians, the consequences went beyond grief and anger. They reshaped daily life. Mothers no longer allowed their daughters to walk alone. Students avoided commercial motorcycles, fearing abductions. Even traders, once proud of the hustle and bustle of open markets, grew wary of strangers offering too-good-to-be-true business deals. Fear became part of the routine. And yet, amid this climate of terror, something else began to happen. Society started to push back. Religious leaders, both Christian pastors and Muslim imams, took to their pulpits to denounce ritual killings as evil, urging followers to resist the lure of blood money. Traditional rulers, guardians of culture, spoke out to separate genuine ancestral traditions from the violent distortions of ritualists. In community meetings, elders reminded the youth that wealth without peace brings nothing but ruin. But change is never easy. Some people still whispered about men in expensive cars who they believed owed their success to juju. Rumors of politicians seeking ritual power during elections continued to spread. The divide between modern Nigeria and ancient superstition remained wide, and ritual kidnapping stood at its dark center. For the families left behind, consequences were deeply personal. Gloria's mother stopped selling food in the market. Every stall reminded her of her daughter's laughter. Kunle's younger brother dropped out of school, too traumatized to continue. The human cost was not just the lives lost, but the dreams shattered, the futures stolen. And yet, through tears and anger, society began to ask, what can we learn from this horror? What lessons, if any, can survive such darkness? Every tragedy leaves behind questions, but also lessons, fragments of wisdom carved out of pain. In the case of ritual kidnappings in Nigeria, those lessons are written in both blood and resilience. The first lesson is simple yet profound. Fear cannot be stronger than community. When Gloria's story shook Ibadan, neighbors did not retreat into silence. They organized, they watched out for one another, and they forced the authorities to take action. When Kunle's mutilated body was found in Lagos, protests spread across the city, and his name became a rallying cry against ritual killings. From grief came solidarity. The second lesson is about the danger of superstition when it collides with desperation. Ritual killings persist because people believe in shortcuts. Shortcuts to wealth, shortcuts to power, shortcuts to success. The victims' stories remind us that when a society elevates material gain above human life, darkness follows. For every businessman who secretly seeks ritual protection, there is a family left weeping over an empty bed. Yet even in this darkness, there are legacies of hope. Survivors, those who narrowly escaped abduction, often dedicate their lives to awareness campaigns, speaking in schools and markets about the dangers of ritual scams. Journalists who risked everything to expose these crimes inspired new generations of truth seekers. Families of victims, though broken, often turn their grief into movements for justice, and there are visible signs of change. Today, more Nigerians are willing to speak openly against money rituals. Awareness campaigns air on radio and TV, warning citizens to stay alert. NGOs work with communities to track missing persons. Even the entertainment industry, through films, songs, and theater, has begun to confront the horror of ritual killings, transforming pain into art that educates. But perhaps the most important legacy is a moral one. Gloria's laughter, though silenced, echoes in the determination of her classmates who continue their studies in her memory. Kunle's roasted corn cart, left abandoned on a street corner, has become a quiet symbol of the dignity of honest work, a reminder that true wealth is not born in shrines, but in sweat, perseverance, and community. The story of ritual kidnappings in Nigeria is not just about crime. It is about the clash between past and present, greed and humanity, fear and courage. It forces us to ask ourselves, what kind of society do we want to build, and what are we willing to sacrifice to get there? And as Nigeria continues to grow, urbanize, and modernize, one haunting question remains. Will the shadows of ritual killings finally fade, or will they continue to follow the next generation? The story of ritual kidnappings in Nigeria does not end neatly. There is no single villain to defeat, no simple cure to apply. Instead, it lingers, like an open wound in the nation's conscience. From the bustling markets of Lagos to the quiet farmlands of Ibadan, whispers of ritual killings still haunt conversations. Each time a young person goes missing, families wonder, is this another kidnapping for rituals? Each time a wealthy businessman flaunts sudden riches, some ask, at what cost? And yet, Nigeria is not a land defined only by its shadows. It is a country of resilience, of music and laughter, of people who rise after every tragedy. Communities have learned to fight back, not only with protests, but with education, awareness, and courage to challenge superstition. Schools now invite activists to speak to children about safety. Religious leaders unite to denounce blood sacrifices as nothing more than a cruel lie. Filmmakers and musicians transform pain into stories that spark national conversations. But challenges remain. Poverty, unemployment, and inequality continue to push some toward desperate measures. The lure of quick wealth still tempts those unwilling to wait for success. And in the hidden corners of the country, ritualists continue to operate, feeding off fear and secrecy. So where does this leave us? Perhaps with a choice for families to remain vigilant, a choice for leaders to strengthen justice systems that too often fail the victims, a choice for society to stop glorifying sudden, unexplained wealth, and instead celebrate dignity, hard work, and compassion. As we close this story, we are left with both sorrow and hope. Sorrow for Gloria, Kunle, and countless others whose lives were stolen. But hope, too, in the voices rising across Nigeria, voices that refuse to be silenced, that insist human life is sacred, that demand change. Because in the end, the fight against ritual killings is not only about catching criminals. It is about reshaping a culture, about ensuring that no parent has to bury a child for the sake of someone else's greed. And yet, one haunting question remains. But is this truly the whole story? Or are there even darker secrets about ritual killings in Nigeria that the world has yet to uncover?